So today on the Linux Certification Virtual Summit, we have Jason Eckert, who is an experienced instructor and best-selling author in the information technology industry with more than 3 decades of IT experience, over 20 certifications, 6 published apps, and 24 published textbooks, covering certification-focused topics such as Unix, Linux, Windows Server, and Microsoft Exchange Server. Jason, thank you and welcome to the Linux Certification Virtual Summit. How are you?
I'm very good, thanks.
Great. So let's just dive right in. Who is Jason Eckert, aka the Linux Guru?
Okay, so I guess the Linux Guru comes from my bio illustration on my website. I asked an artist I know to draw her impression of me from what she knew, and there I am holding a Linux Guru mug. But I've been a Unix user, programmer, sysadmin for all of my professional life, working for many different companies, including Digital Equipment Corporation, Sun Microsystems, even Microsoft. And when Linux gained traction in the late 90s, I naturally became a Linux user, programmer, and sysadmin as well, since Linux is really just open source Unix.
Yeah.
Yeah, but for the last 18 years, I've been teaching computer science and information technology in both the corporate and college worlds in Canada. And right now, I'm the dean for the technology faculties for 9 campuses at Trask College in Canada.
Oh wow, that's extraordinary. 9 campuses. So let me ask you, how do you infuse Linux into the technologies of the college that you're the dean at?
Well, we in the classes or otherwise.
Just in general, like how do you tell your faculty that Linux is a big aspect of the technologies that you want your students to learn? Just your
Oh,
influence. Yeah.
we don't need to tell the the faculty. They already know. Linux is a big thing when it comes to the job market. Well, all across North America, but especially in Ontario, where most of our grads get jobs where most of their job may be working with like a Windows server supporting Windows 7 clients, but there's Linux servers that they have to support. So you wouldn't get that job unless you knew some Linux.
Hmm.
There's other jobs like if you work for NavBlue or Google, where it's 100% Linux, and the only requirement to get hired is Linux certification, right? So Linux is pretty big. It's growing, of course. I mean, we see Linux more and more now. It wasn't a household term 20 years ago, but now everyone's got an Android phone, and that's just Linux and drag.
Yes.
And everyone runs Linux on embedded devices, and my fridge runs Linux.
Great.
I'm not kidding. I can browse the web from my fridge. I guess
Wow.
it's supposed to, save you from, sneaking food during the night. I'm not sure, but no, it doesn't work. But Linux does on the fridge.
Perfect, perfect. I love the way you express that Linux is everywhere and that this world is ran through Linux. I tell anyone that wants to Linux, listen, that Linux is the key. Like, you need to know Linux. Linux runs our phones. It's in servers at all the corporations. Like, it's big. And thank you for elaborating on that fact there.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
I see that you wrote a CompTIA Linux Plus book. What inspired you to write that book and that study guide?
Okay, so my Linux Plus textbook for Cengage, formerly Course Technology, it's in its 4th edition right now. The first edition I wrote back in 2001, 2002. And back then I was teaching a lot of Linux in the corporate training world, because Linux was taking the corporate world by storm then. And college textbook publishers were getting a lot of requests for Linux textbooks. The only problem was that there were virtually no Linux authors on the market. So they started asking around for what a good author was in the corporate world, and my name kind of came up, and from the corporate training I did, and I thought it was a good fit. And I'm glad I did it because it was very natural for me, because I basically spent my time teaching people who know nothing about Linux how to make Linux look easy and master it. So it was just a kind of an extension of that.
Perfect, perfect. And you said you're on your fourth edition, right?
Yeah, it's the fourth
Okay,
edition,
perfect.
released last year.
Great, great. So how have you, since this is your fourth edition, writing the CompTIA Linux Plus book, how has it evolved from the first book you wrote until now?
Oh, every edition is radically different. Now, mind you, the structure, uh, when you write a book for Linux or Unix, you have to be very careful. You have to make sure that every micro topic is in the right order so that it flows progressively, because otherwise Linux could seem very, very difficult if you come across something you've never heard of before that you need to know in order to understand something. So what I've done is I've made a structure from in the first edition that I've kind of kept the same throughout the entire evolution of the book, but the content around that structure has changed drastically because Linux has evolved drastically in the last 15 years. I mean, my last edition has things like dual distributions and ZFS and more server services than we covered in the first edition, and talks about newer technologies like System D, which is really going to replace the old System 5 in right? So yeah, it's definitely evolved, but the structure is really the same.
Great, great. So how do you stay above the curve of, like you just mentioned, System MD, I believe you said, is replacing System 5? Yeah, so how do you stay above the curve to know what's new coming out with the CompTIA Linux Plus exams?
Oh, well, it's pretty easy. I don't I don't really stay above the curve when it comes to the certification exam. I just stay current with Linux. So one, I run a lot of Linux servers, and two, a lot of them are run in production. For example, one of our main web servers that we use to host our student content for our programming programs are all running Fedora 23 in the cloud and in our data center, and I'm the only administrator of those machines. So, of course, when something new comes out, I'm going to see it, I'm going to research it, I'm going to put it on my servers, and then CompTIA will follow by introducing a new revision of their cert exam that covers the new technologies. All I have to do is look at the objective list and say, I see, that makes perfect sense.
Cool, cool. Great. So, some people view CompTIA Linux Plus exam as kind of a Linux beginner exam, and they view it as it doesn't hold as much weight as other Linux certifications on the market. But kind of what is your view on the CompTIA Linux Plus exam compared to, say, other exams like Red Hat or the Linux Professional Institute?
Okay, well, firstly, CompTIA Linux Plus is a beginner certification exam for Linux administrators, right? Uh, but it's probably the most desirable first Linux certification to get, and for many people, the only one they're ever going to need. And there's a couple reasons. There's a couple reasons for that. Firstly, it's CompTIA. CompTIA has huge brand recognition in organizations today. They actually go out and advertise within organizations. So HR departments know that if a certification ends with the plus symbol, it's good, right?
Yep.
So, and since certification's primary use is a skills benchmark for hiring, if you pass Linux Plus, you get the advantage of that brand recognition when applying for a job. That's the first main reason. The second one is the Linux Plus certification is essentially the exact same two exams as LPI Level 1. That's why it's called CompTIA, powered by LPI. And LPI Level 1 covers a pretty solid set of content that you need to know to do any Linux administration in any organization that isn't specific to any single Linux distribution. So if you get a job as a Linux administrator, you can always go on to like level 2 or 3, which is very high level and very specific to certain things after completing Linux Plus. Mainly to get those internal, promotions or bonuses, or to even maybe, move on to another organization that needs someone with a larger Linux skill set, right? You never know.
Yeah, yeah. Perfect. Thanks. Okay, let's segue back to the CompTIA Linux Plus exam. Are there any Linux commands you believe someone should focus on knowing in order to pass the exam?
Yes. If it's one command, it's man.
Okay.
There, there are hundreds and hundreds of Linux commands, files, and procedures that are going to be on that cert exam. And you have to know hundreds. And there's no substitute for practice. You actually have to run the commands. And when you run a command, like say, for example, grep, just for stuff within a file, you're never going to forget what grep does or how to use it. And if you look at the manual page on the command using the man command, so man grep, you'll see how to use grep. You'll learn all the common options like grep-i if you want to make it case insensitive, or grep-v if you want to reverse what grep is doing, right? So there's no substitute for that. So you have to, go through a bunch of different commands. And if there's one command that you really have to know is man, don't be afraid to look up the help file for every single command that's on the objective list and have fun executing it. And then you'll pop those questions off on the certification exam, no problem.
This is true. Everyone, please listen to him when he said, please know the man command, because it has helped me pass my CompTIA Linux Plus exam. So, yeah, everything that you're saying, it's truth, actually, very much so. Since the CompTIA exam is 2 exams, what would you say would be a good strategy for someone to focus on taking an exam? Should they take the first exam, which I believe right now is 103, or should they take 104 first, or does it not matter? What's your take on that?
Doesn't matter. I wouldn't. Some people say you should do them the same day. I say, well, that's great if you want to do twice as much studying. I'd write them separately. I'd write either 103 or 104 first, then you study for half of the material that's on the certification exam, and then you write that half and pass it, and then you go on to the next. You focus your study on the next half.
I agree. So how difficult would you say it is to pass the Linux Plus exam?
Well, now that's a good question. The reason that's a good question is because I usually see one of 2 types of people. Who write that certification exam. There's those who skim through a bit of material and go in and write and fail it and come out thinking it was very, very tough or impossible. Because you can pass other certifications from other vendors like that. Linux, you actually have to know what you're talking about to pass it. So those who look through the exam objectives and then overstudy everything, practice everything on a Linux virtual machine at home, maybe running on Windows or Macintosh, or even natively installed, pass with flying colors and think it's easy because they've spent that time going through everything that's on the cert exam, right? It wasn't easy. It was just that they properly prepared for it, right? So Linux isn't hard. You just do have to know all the topics listed on the cert objectives in order to pass it, and they could ask you anything.
This is true.
Yeah, so you have to study probably twice as hard for a Linux certification than any other certification, and that's regardless of Linux Plus or Red Hat or LPI.
This is true, because once I completed the Linux Plus exam, I just felt so exhausted, but I was happy I passed both, so it worked out. Yeah. So you did mention having a virtual machine. So would you say what software do you think someone should practice with to help them gain that experience before they take the exam? Which Linux software?
So that's a great question. That's a very important question, actually. When you're learning Linux can seem hard. So I wouldn't expect someone to give up their main desktop, whether it's Windows or Macintosh. But you can run another operating system in there simultaneously, no problem, if you have enough RAM. And most computers today come with 8 gigs of RAM, and that's enough to run, a virtual machine in Linux with a full GUI, nice and fast, using something like if you've got Windows 8 or higher, Hyper-V, or you can use Oracle VirtualBox on Macintosh or Windows. It's actually much faster than Hyper-V. But the Linux that you should use isn't just one distribution. You have to use at least 2. And the reason for that is Linux Plus is not vendor specific.
Yes.
So they will test you on the Red Hat package manager. They'll also test you on the Debian package manager, which are the two major package managers used on Linux systems today. So you have to have a Red Hat-based distribution and a Debian-based distribution. They'll also test you on the new System D, system initialization system, as well as the traditional System 5 system initialization system. So you have to have a more newer as well as a slightly older Linux distribution as well. So I tell people, go get, say, the latest edition of Fedora, the latest distribution of Fedora, which is 23, and install that. And that comes with the Red Hat package manager and System D. And then maybe get Ubuntu 14 long-term support, which has the Debian package manager and comes with System 5. And then when you get a question on anything related to Red Hat, Debian, package managers, or System D or System 5, you can load up the right virtual machine and try out those commands and understand and commit to memory all the stuff you need for the cert exam.
Yes, and don't forget to use the man command also. Yep.
Man, that's very important. Yeah. Google
Great.
helps. You can Google man pages, right? So.
This is true too. Google is like your one-stop shopping also. Are there any Linux forums or blogs that you recommend someone looking to obtain their Linux Plus certification to check out?
There aren't any certification-specific blogs that I know of off the top of my head. There may be, I just don't know of them. Mm-hmm. But I follow over 24 Linux blogs. There are many Linux blogs out there, and the great thing about it is you'll keep current and bleeding edge. So even for things that are not on the certification exam, like Docker or ZFS, always explore them. Have fun. Don't just study for the cert exam. Study Linux, right? Have fun with Linux, because the certification exam will get you the job interview, and what will get you the job is if you can sit in a seat with an IT manager and say, hey, this is what I like to use Linux for, and this is what Linux is good at doing, right? Yes. And thus, yes, this person is perfect for our team, right? So yeah, like there's probably a lot of them out there. I actually list a couple dozen of them in my book, but they're generic Linux, blogs, and there's many of them on there. And I always add a new one every month, so I'm probably up to about 50 now, and in my RSS reader, and there's some great stuff that comes out every single month.
Great. So what was the last blog that you added to your RSS reader, if you don't mind?
I'd have to look that one up.
Okay. I mean, we have time.
Okay.
If you don't mind.
I don't mind at all, actually. I'm just going to have to remote into a machine.
Okay.
Okay, so I've got quite a few of them up here.
Okay.
There's a lot of them that I like fullcirclemagazine.org. LXER.com. Of course, there's How To Forge. That's a great website. Okay. Linux Voice, Linux Journal, Unix Men, Phoronix was the last one I added. So PHORONIX.com. Kernelnewbies.org.
Oh.
It's a great one. LinuxQuestions.org. Technix, TKNIXX.com is a great one. Okay. ExplainShell.com is amazing. If you want to put in any Linux command, it will actually break it down and explain what it's doing for you. ExplainShell.com. SS64.com/bash. It's a bash reference. It's phenomenal. A more advanced one that I like a lot is commandlinefoo.com, fu.com. It's some of the kung fu you can do in Linux, such as redirecting files through SSH. TechMint, Linux.com, Linux Survival, LinuxAppFinder.com, SourceForge, of course. There's a lot of YouTube channels like Sysadmin Girl, Quidsup, Celebrate Ubuntu, The Urban Penguin, Charles McComb, who's actually a friend of mine, Nixie Pixel, that's a good one. The Spats channel, and a lot of Twitter handles to follow as well.
Okay.
So, of course, always follow like the distributions that you're using, like at Ubuntu forums if you use Ubuntu, at Fedora, at Ubuntu, at Ask Ubuntu, at Linux Questions, Linux_Pro, at Linux Voice, at Full Circle Mag. Full Circle Mag's really good.
Great.
Great for data mining, right?
Thank you so much for that list. That was wonderful. How
Yeah,
has
there's
no?
more.
I believe you.
Yeah, it's okay. It could go on for hours.
Yeah, but it's good stuff. So that's a great thing. So, how has being an author and a certified Linux professional impact your life?
Oh, well, I get a lot of email from people who've read my books, and I enjoy that. There's the odd weird one, but uh, like you get the odd person who might email you and say, "I'm trying to connect Linux to my toaster." That's always fun. I reply to those, and I kind of give it a good stab. But putting even the most minor of topics in that logical or progressive order I talked about earlier,
Mhm.
so that people can learn Linux without thinking it's hard. That actually was the best part of writing the book, and it forces you to grow your organizational skills. So that's probably how what's impacted my life the most is writing allows you to be better organized at other things. And that transfers to every other part of your life. So it's maybe a better teacher, better dean, better friend, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay. Well, are there any final takeaways that you would like to give someone who's looking to become CompTIA Linux Plus certified and who may be a little scared or afraid? What would you tell that person?
Spend some quality time with Linux. So Linux is one of those things where you can treat it like a program you have to study and then drop afterwards. Don't treat it like that. Linux is actually, if you realize that Linux really runs the world when you do your online banking, you're talking to Unix and Linux machines. When you go to big websites, Amazon, Google, whatever, Facebook, it's all Linux. Like, we don't see it, but we're starting to see it. So if you realize, hey, you know what, there's something worth doing here, then you're likely going to keep Linux in your computer, in a virtual machine forever. So my advice is don't study Linux just for certification. Study Linux because Linux is cool. Keep it on after you're done the cert. Use it every day. Spend some quality time with Linux. You'll be shocked at what it can do, even after the introduction to Linux certification, Linux Plus, right?
Yes.
Use it as a media center at home. You know, make your own web servers. Apache and Nginx are way faster than IIS. That's for darn sure. And you can do a lot of stuff. Get a free SSL certificate from Let's Encrypt. To do that on Windows would be like nailing Jello to a tree. To do it on Linux is two commands.
Yeah. So
Right.
true.
So there's lots of stuff you can do with Linux. Open your mind to that world of Linux, and in the process, get certified because that's a job benchmark, right? And employers want to see that. They want to see that you're getting Linux certified. It's even more important now because Microsoft, if you've seen Linux Con North America, which was not too far from me in Toronto, and I was there.
Right.
Um, I mean, they had Microsoft up there, the CEO of Microsoft, with a slide that said Microsoft loves Linux.
Loves Linux. Yep.
Yes, and there's a Ubuntu and canonical system in Windows 10 now, and Microsoft is tooting running a lot of their services on Linux, which makes sense, probably because they won't have to maintain their own operating system over time, right? If they run Microsoft SQL Server on Linux, which it does right now, or .NET or Active Directory, right? So.
Yes, great. People need to understand that this Linux is a whole other world that's taking over the world. And I think you expressed that very clearly. Thank you so much.
You're quite welcome. Oh, one last thing I should mention. For those who don't know, who have a Macintosh, one of the coolest things I've ever experienced is when you get a bunch of students in class. The first day of our class, I say, okay, who here has a Macintosh at home? And you get maybe a third of the class put up their hand, maybe more, right? And I tell them, okay, just go to Applications and Terminal. And everything we do in this class, you can do on your Macintosh because it's Unix. It blows their mind. All the same commands, including man.
Yes. It's a great thing. Well, thank you so much, Jason. It's been a pleasure to have you here at the Linux Certification Virtue Summit to discuss CompTIA Linux Plus. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Oh, you're quite welcome.